Okay, welcome back to our discussion about fair use, and we're going to go ahead and talk briefly about the three videos that you just watched. The first one, fair use and free speech in documentary films, and it's one of these sorts of things where these different organizations are trying to address the problems of copyright as it now exists, and the needs to be able to have access to materials to create additional materials. And so what this video tries to communicate is that it wants to recognize that copyright and fair use are moving targets. And the idea is not so much to be sloppy about these sorts of things, but to not bow down to one's perceptions of these things without, working with the system. And so as was discussed in other videos, these guys are trying to put together a best practices document, and so that's kind of the nature of what they're doing here. And then recognizing that fair use it's a process. It's not something set in stone, but by kind of banding together and recognizing the process, and these individuals are quite hopeful in terms of how we can use copyrighted materials in the future. The second video was Remix Culture, Fair Use is Your Friend, and they tried to discuss this in terms of the balance between the needs of the copyright holders and the new content creators. And what they're looking for in terms of pushing the boundaries is that they want to use fair use as a safeguard against censorship. In other words, where we don't have things locked away to the exclusion of further creators, and it'd be something of a censorship kind of a thing. And then, of course, they go back to the codes of best practices, and very much are acknowledging that fair use is kind of in these. It's an active participation kind of a thing. Again, it's not something set in stone, and recognizing that this is not about this is about reusing previous art. So it's a dialogue. It's something that's active. The last video is one that's a lot more. It's expressing something that we have to be very conscious of, and it uses the example of the award-winning film Eyes on the Prize that was released in 1987, and then in 1993, the licenses that were used to use the copyrighted material they expired, and then when the producers went to renegotiate, they were hit with licensing fees upwards towards $500,000, and obviously this is problematic for the most part, because documentaries are not blockbusters. $500,000 is quite a bit of money when you think about the field of documentaries. And then toward the end of the video, they list a lot of different videos that are no longer, or films that are no longer available for public consumption, can't be bought because the creators couldn't afford the license fees. So it's one of these sorts of things. We're quite concerned because we have to ask the question: who is served when history and culture are private property? We want to recognize the rights of the content creators, but when it comes to these situations where part of our history is being locked away in private collections and private vaults, then that doesn't really serve the public in the way that copyright was meant to originally be served. Okay, so one other thing that we can explore a little bit is the question of the interesting case of Shepard Ferry and the Obama poster. Is this fair use or not? I direct you towards my website where I have this, or actually in our FSO, where I have this posted, and you can go ahead and read through that article and then weigh in on what your feelings about the Shepard Ferry case. Okay, to recap what we've been discussing tonight, the facts about fair use, that there are limits to copyright. It's a very slim kind of a thing. So part of the requirements for something to be considered fair use is that it needs to be either something related to teaching, reporting the news, parody, or critical comment. And that fulfills, it has to be one of these four things in terms of its nature. And then the amount is a small amount, and it's not one of these sorts of things where you can set a policy as to how much that amount is. It's very much based on the nature of of the material that you're using. If you're talking about a 3-minute song, then a very small snippet is permitted. But again, you're kind of running the risk, and it's permitted, but it's permitted as long as it has to do with teaching, news reporting, parody, or critical comment. You can't take a snippet of something and use it just willy-nilly. And then, of course, we have the last one having to do with the commercial effect of the usage. And then again, fair use is not a right, it's a legal defensible position. And the last thing that I really kind of want to leave you with is the idea that you need to take the word fair out of the idea of fair use, because people think in terms of what's fair, and that gets them into trouble right away, because fair use has to do with how it's used, how much it's used, and the commercial effect, and most people ignore how it's used, the first part of it, and that's what gets us into trouble. So I'm hoping this helped you out in terms of understanding fair use, and look forward to further discussions in the future, and part 3 when we talk about Creative Commons.